you want to do, we'll do some announcements and then do the movie, and then I'll intro Haroon. We'll do announcements, and then we'll do the movie, and then I'll intro him. Yeah. Okay. All right, guys, we're going to get started. Welcome to Duo Tech Talks. I'm John Oberheide, CTO here at Duo, and we hold this event monthly to bring in, our good buddies and not so good buddies from all over the place, all over the world. Haroon is joining us from South Africa. Flew in 15 hours of flight last night, and then when are you leaving? Saturday morning at 5 a.m. So he's here for a whole, 36 hours. More travel time than Ann Arbor time, probably. But we hold this monthly Tech Talks to bring in cool security speakers, cool technology speakers, and bring it to you guys here locally, as well as anyone who's on the live stream remotely or still upstairs watching and, hoarding the keg. So to kick it off, we always open it up for local announcements or shout outs, greets, or job announcements, whatever else. Anyone in the audience got any announcements? Right here? Ready?
This work?
I think so.
Deep Field Networks.
Wait, I don't think it's working.
Is that work? Yeah. Deep Field Networks is hiring for back-end, front-end, and we are also taking applications for summer internships for all available positions. Also systems developers, so yeah.
Cool. Hello, I'm Ryan Morton from A2 CivTech. We're a local Code for America brigade. And on Monday night at the Ann Arbor District Library, we're going to have a presentation about C-click fix and also wireless IPSI, which is a open mesh networking interface that we're going to try to bring here to Ann Arbor. So come check us out, 7 to 8:30 in the downtown library.
The local security meetup ArbSec meets the first Wednesday of every month. We changed locations, so you need to kind of look at the meetup group to figure out where it'll be. But it's fun if you want to talk to other security-minded people and drink some beers and stuff.
Hi, Steve Fuller, Networks Group. We're right around the corner on Main and Huron, and my company is hiring hackers. So we've got openings for junior and senior pen testers. So anybody who's interested, networksgroup.com or Steve at networksgroup.com.
So, we have a special preview before we get started with our creative team out in Vegas interviewed a couple of characters, Charlie Miller and Chris Valasek. Both Duo Tech Talk veterans that have been here, and we started a series of a hacker history, and what we did was we got them a few beers and then asked them about their kind of car hacking saga and how it evolved over time. And so the creative team had a lot of fun with it, and we just posted this video on YouTube, I think an hour ago. So without further ado, this is Chris and Charlie's hacking story in their own words.
I thought we didn't like each other.
No, well, I didn't like you.
Yeah, I know you
liked
like
me. It's
yeah.
fine. I wasn't entirely happy with the management at the company we worked at.
Yeah.
And I thought that Chris was in very tight with them.
So our relationship really started around me getting fired.
So you wanted to do research with me,
I did.
and I was doing the NFC stuff.
But I wanted some of that money because it was free money.
It was free money.
I like money. We bought a 2014 Jeep Cherokee off the dealership.
I bought it without ever seeing it.
Yeah.
I was like, Yeah, you got a Jeep Cherokee that auto parks.
By the way, the guy who made the commission on these things, just had to love it. Some dude just bought a car. Didn't even fucking see it. Didn't even ask to see it.
So we went with Andy Greenberg because he had done our previous research. What we did was we sent him on the highway and we just killed his engine essentially. Andy is like Academy Award winning performer.
Oh my god. Someone give him a fucking Oscar.
I know.
It basically was like, what's happening? I can't speed up. I'm like, yeah, pull over. You can literally still be rolling, kick it in neutral, and restart the car, and it'll be on your way again. I was like, oh no, there's a big rig. Everyone's like, why don't you go rent track space? I was like, all right, well, fucking give me 10 grand and find me a racetrack, and I'll do it.
Right.
Assholes.
It's like it doesn't even make sense.
Go back to being fat on the internet. I would call you, if I got ran over by a car, I'd be like, Charlie, this is fucking sick research, bro, but just ran over myself. Peace. I regret nothing. Publish a paper. This is the first time that there's been a physical recall of a mass-produced product because of a software security issue. The best thing is, reporters ask us to do a demo, and we can't do it anymore. They're like, what the fuck? Why can't you do it? No, it's good that we can't do the demo
Right, they
anymore.
fixed
because
it.
It's actually fixed.
Right.
It's awesome. That's what we want. We want it actually fixed. We don't want it broken forever.
Right.
Yeah, so figure this. We got two Goliaths, Fiat Chrysler Automotive and Sprint, to force them to be cooperative. That's the shit hacker wet dreams are made of right there. It's fucking
I thought
amazing.
this is what that was.
I assume the wet dream would be them in the middle with these two fucking young bloods hanging out in bed with them.
Yeah, you,
So did they say anything about how they got their start giving a tech talk at Duo Security?
they didn't, but so the background of that was they had done their research. It was, to kind of paraphrase the story, Charlie had done some NFC research for the Cyber Fast Track program, a DARPA program run by Mudge, who was a Duo Tech Talk speaker. That's what he's referring to as free money, government money, all of our money. It's free money for Charlie. And then Chris and Charlie decided, hey, how can we get the government to buy us a car or something absolutely ridiculous? What's the craziest thing we could do? And so they actually started to look at car security, did a Cyber Fast Track grant. That's when Chris came and gave a presentation at Duo, also spoke at DEF CON a couple years ago about it. All the car companies said, that's not a realistic attack. You'd have to be physically in the car, plugged into the CAN bus, the onboard diagnostics port. And of course, all the security researchers were like, well, no, you could do it remotely. You just need to find one bug. But the auto industry kind of shut them down and said, we don't believe you, it's not realistic. So they spent the next year finding that one bug and then did the presentation at this most recent DEF CON Black Hat showing how just over the internet, you could connect to the car and get on the CAN bus and then do all the same attacks.
Awesome presentation. I didn't think I was actually going to get into that talk, but I did.
Yeah, it was pretty packed.
Yes.
So switching gears, up next, we have Haroon Meer, who I guess Haroon, the way he wanted me to introduce him was he says stupid stuff that sometimes people listen to, but in reality, Haroon is a extremely intelligent and capable individual, and was at SensePost for how many years? 11 years at SensePost out of South Africa, a security firm, and then spun out his own group called Thinkst. And Thinkst has done some amazing projects, some amazing research, and actually released some products, most recently some, medium interaction honeypots that are really simple and easy to deploy on your network. We've got a couple at Duo called Canary. It's pimping. Canary.tools, I think, is the TLD. Nice. I didn't know that .tools was a TLD, but yep. But yeah, Haroon has done amazing research, given keynotes at a lot of conferences, has a lot of very insightful commentary on the security industry as a whole, and he's come to Duo Tech Talks to share some of that. So please welcome Haroon.
Thank you very much. Thanks. So I just want to see if the mic works because I'm not going to hold it, so it seems to be okay. We're also doing a strange split screen thing. So if we get desynced, it's mainly because of the setup, but I'll try to do it. I've also got a lot of slides, so I'm going to try to go quickly. But because it's semi-informal, if you guys have questions at any point, just raise your hand or just scream it out, and we don't have to wait till the end. So the first question you should be asking is, what's with the stupid title? Okay, mainly it comes from a book, which I'm not sure how many of you have read. Just with a show of hands, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Okay, a couple of you. Okay, it's a really good book. You should check it out if you haven't. Okay, and essentially the thing that you should be questioning there is, what's that book got to do with security? And it turns out that actually there's a whole bunch of things in common between the two. So Steve Katz, who's regarded as the world's first CISO, was recently on a podcast with a guy called Digital Gem. So if you guys haven't seen the Digital podcast series, it's worth checking out. And on this podcast, he was basically asked, what's it like to be a CISO at a company? And he said, effectively, you've got to run it like you're running a startup inside your company. He says you have all the same challenges. You've basically got marketing that you have to get right. You've basically got to get people to buy into your product. You've then got to rack up wins. And if you go through the book, you'll find there's a few things that overlap. One of them is just the number of quotes that come through from the book. And probably the first one is, so he was talking about startups. I think it maps pretty much to if you're trying to run security at a company these days. You don't sleep, you have cold sweats, you wake up and cry a lot. So I figured the plan for this talk, like for most talks of this nature, is I'm going to steal Twitter quotes from people cleverer than me, and then I'm going to steal actual quotes from people older than me. Okay, and that's pretty much my plan for the talk. So if we go back a little bit, in 2011, we put out a blog post which, without any sort of exaggeration, was titled "Our Upcoming Security Apocalypse." Okay, and essentially what we were saying was that the security industry was in a dangerous space. Essentially, we were saying that when we started in the 90s or just before that, we kept complaining that management don't buy in, management isn't supporting us. And at some point in the mid-90s, management did start buying in a little bit. Money started flowing in. We started getting firewalls. We started getting reasonable jobs. And at some point, we kind of declared mission accomplished. Okay, we were beating the script kiddies. We found ways to lock down the networks, and we thought we had it all down. Except, of course, we didn't, right? Attackers kept progressing. Attackers kept getting better. And we started getting stuck inside the companies we worked at. So we started getting busy with filling out TPS reports, and the game started advancing a little bit further than we could. And the interesting thing is, we kept saying the same thing, right? We kept saying management don't buy in, it's a management problem, except largely management had. And we didn't notice when the switch happened, because at some point, like if you look at early black hats, people were there on their own dime. They had to make a break from companies to come to attend black hat. You look at most security conferences now, there's well-paid people around that room. They're traveling across the world. Management has bought in and is paying those people. They just don't know that those people don't have a handle on the problem. Okay, and essentially what I was saying is that what we were doing was largely starting to look like the global financial crisis, right? Because money was changing hands, people were getting rich, but nobody was telling the people at the top that we still didn't have a handle on the problem. And to their defense, lots of company boards actually now think they have got it handled because they're paying some CISO a whole bunch of money. They've got a security team with sometimes hundreds of people. And if you ask them, they've done their bit. They've hired these guys. What they don't know is that most of us security guys are mainly just hoping that the attacks don't happen on our watch, okay? Because beyond that, we don't have it. And so nobody's actually speaking truth to power, right? Nobody's saying to the boards, hey, listen, actually, we don't have this stuff. Actually, we don't know how to make this go away. And then in 2013, we wrote a piece called Your Company's Security Posture May Be Terrible and It Might Be Okay. And one of the things we were saying there was essentially the short version is just that security is a hard problem. Okay, and lots of the time, the answer to almost any question is it's complicated. Okay, and the problem with that is people don't want to hear it's complicated. Okay, while you are saying it's complicated, someone's slid in and sold them a box with shiny lights because that's a reasonable, quick solution. Okay, and when you say this, normally you get someone saying, well, isn't it okay if we're doing something? Like, isn't doing something better than nothing? And my answer to that is no, that sometimes pedaling in the wrong direction is worse than if you were just doing nothing. And I think that that's something we're doing a lot of these days. So when I did this, obviously it didn't make a lot of friends. Okay, I had a whole bunch of people telling me I should leave the industry because we suck. And of course, the simple answer to that is pointing out where we're doing things wrong doesn't mean that I absolutely hate it or doesn't mean that I hate the industry. And the quote that generally comes up there, you guys will recognize from Good to Great, okay, is the Stockdale quote, which says, you never confuse the faith that you will prevail in the end with the reality of your situation. Okay, and so for a large part, this talk is about looking at some of the reality of the situation. Fortunately, or unfortunately, I don't have to convince people so hard anymore. Okay, when we wrote that piece in 2011 and we were telling people, listen, actually we're in pretty bad shape, there were lots of people who said we were overdoing it. But since then, we've had a few things come through which make this talk a lot easier to give. The simple one there is LulzSec, which you guys would have heard of, went around attacking the planet. Okay, essentially they showed us that you could still hack like people were hacking in 2001 and still have a huge effect. Okay, and then the NSA leaks effectively showed us that we were sucking at attack, we were sucking at defense also. Okay, between the two of them, it's pretty clear that we were sucking in general. And with the NSA leaks, one of the things that people go to is, hey, if a nation state is after you, you pretty much all bets are off. But one of the things you have to ask yourself there, honestly, is how they managed to pull off these attacks for so long without anyone seeing them coming. Okay, and that bit is the bit that's truly embarrassing. So if you guys ever get a chance to catch a talk by Brian Snow, you should. He's the ex-director of information assurance for the NSA. He gave a talk in Malta, largely to NATO types. And his talk, again, was titled, Our Cybersecurity Status is Grim and the Way Ahead Will Be Hard. Okay, which is an impressive title just on its own. But essentially, Brian said, look, I'm here to tell you that your cyber systems continue to function and serve you not due to the expertise of your staff, but just due to the sufferance of your opponents. Okay, so the only reason you haven't been hacked yet is because people haven't chosen to hack you yet. Okay, which is a hard thing for most people to hear, but it's true. Okay, now if you look at some of those guys who I said, the older, wiser guys, and ask them for their reasons that we're in this bad shape, if you go to check out Dan Gear, he'll tell you that the reason, there's two reasons. The one is you've got sentient opponents, and the other is your rate of change. Okay, sentient opponents, he's effectively making the point that you often hear people saying, we've learned to build good bridges. Why can't we do computer security that way? Okay, and the obvious difference is when you build a bridge to be stable, Mother Nature doesn't change the rules to then make your bridge unstable. But when you're dealing with sentient opponents, they change the rules all the time. And his rate of change point is essentially that we are making strides forward, but things are changing too quickly for us. If you look at the next guy, so that's Gary McGraw, Digital Gem, who I spoke about, and he'll tell you that the reason we're in bad shape is because of a focus on the bug parade instead of focusing on secure engineering. Okay, he says we're too focused on the latest exploit and not focused enough on building things right. Richard Baitlick is the head of Mandiant, and if you ask him the reason for it, he'll tell you the reason is China. Okay, which is kind of true. Incidentally, I thought we'd check out CrowdStrike, and CrowdStrike tell you you don't have a malware problem, you have an adversary problem. Okay, which sounds really cool, but I'm not really sure what they mean. What's interesting, and I only found it out for this talk, is they've actually got that trademarked. So yeah, you can't really say that without getting permission. But if you ask me, our problem starts off with this, okay? And that is to say that our problem is bad abuse of Venn diagrams. Okay, because if you check out this Venn diagram, and it's from some university, it absolutely makes no sense as a Venn diagram, right? Like I'm not even sure what this area actually means. Like they haven't bothered to use the color. It's terrible, and that university should be ashamed. So essentially, I'm saying, look, we do have some genuinely hard problems to solve, okay? And this talk pretty much, what I want to focus on are the problems that I think that are hard, that don't necessarily get the right amount of attention. And if nothing else, it should be entertaining to see someone rant for a little bit. So if we fix that Venn diagram, or fix it a little more, essentially the three stages that I want to talk about, or the three parts I'm going to blame are software complexity, markets, and then people. Okay, so if we go first and hit complexity, I'm going to take a look at this paper by Bruce Schneier. Okay, and what's interesting, if you hit this Bruce Schneier paper, which you won't be able to read because there's so many words, what you'll essentially see him saying is, look, there's bugs in everything, and the more complex the stuff is, the harder it is to analyze. Okay, and he goes on to say, this stuff's not going to change. The networks of the future will be more complex and therefore less secure. Okay, and he goes on to say, look, this is not going to change. He says, either we find a way to press pause so that we're not getting more complex stuff, or we accept that stuff's never going to be secure. Okay, and the thing that's interesting for me about this is Schneier wrote this in '99. Okay, so this is not a new problem. People have seen it coming for a while. And the question then is, how are we doing since '99? Okay, and I guess predictably the answer is a whole lot worse. Okay, so I'll take a few things so that we can quickly look at it. The Linux kernel back in '91 had something like 10,000 lines of code in it. Today, the Linux kernel has something like 20 million lines of code in it. Okay, in 2012, we were committing about 10,500 lines of code per day. Okay, and that's not the worst of it. If you take a web browser like Google Chrome, okay, you'll find also, so when this was taken, it had 16 million lines of code. As of today, it's also 20 million lines of code just for your web browser. Okay, and so it should make you realize that on average, when your machine browses a web page, okay, your exposure, the number of code parts that are going down are so huge at this point that it's not something that can be reasonably audited. Okay, and it's not just that that's a problem, okay, because what you're finding is that there's parts for you to be attacked in places that we never saw coming, or places that we didn't expect. So I'm not sure how many of you here saw this article. So there's a guy called Jeroen Domburg over at SpritesMod. Okay, and at some point he basically took his old hard drives out and decided to see what he could check out with them. And essentially what he found is that on your average hard drive, you had 3 fairly capable CPU cores. Okay, and so the end result of Jerome's playing with this stuff was he ended up running Linux on his hard drive. Okay, and understand, again, I'm not saying he installed it on his hard drive, I'm saying he ran it on his hard drive controllers. Okay, and that's not the only example of it, right? A little while back, the guys from Panic Software, okay, just Mac devs, were trying to figure out a display problem with the Lightning DV adapter. They couldn't understand why they were getting blank pixels. Okay, and so effectively, they took a hacksaw to this thing, okay, and what they then figured out was these things were running SOC ARM on a chips also, okay? And so these DVI adapters actually have 2 gigs of RAM and were mini computers also, okay? And you start to bump into this everywhere you look. At CCC in, I think it was 2013, Bunny and Zobs did this awesome talk, okay, where they basically look at SD memory cards. Okay, and scarily, what they end up finding is that these tiny devices, right, those things, also have microprocessors built into them. Okay, microprocessors that were ending up giving people sometimes up to 100 megahertz capability. Okay, and with what they did, they ended up subverting those so that essentially they'd man in the middle the adapters. But again, if you're trying to talk about just how stupidly complex things have gone, those throwaway pieces of plastic are now effectively computers that you need to fit into your threat model. And so at this point, we can take another quote from the book. Okay, you've dropped deep into the abyss, and you might never get out. So if you're going to talk about the security of things, at some point you'll find that FX has said something, and he's probably said it better than most. So FX and Gaken released a paper at some point. And one of the core takeaways from their paper was that our current security model is a composite one. We've got a whole bunch of pieces that get clumped together. And the security of each of those pieces ends up weakening the others. His takeaway quote, in a composite system, there's no critical gate, everything's a gate. Okay, and we've kind of gotten into security with this gate type of thinking. Which gate can we protect things at? But effectively, we're vulnerable in a whole bunch of spots. Helva Flake gave a keynote a little while after that, titled Why Johnny Can't Tell If He's Compromised. And essentially, he had a bunch of, so he had 7 points that said, well, here's what, if we had this, we'd be able to tell if we were compromised. So if we were able to verify signatures on our binaries, if we were able to verify signatures on kernel binaries. Predictably, he then goes through the talk to explain which of these we have. Okay, it turns out we have none of them. Okay, and he ends up with the conclusion that says, look, given modern infrastructure, it's nearly impossible to determine if a machine is compromised. Okay, it's also nearly impossible to uninfect a machine once that machine's been infected. Okay, so if we're talking about complexity, I think that's my case for why we're in trouble. Okay, and so what I'm going to go to next is software. And in terms of software, in truth, we're just provably bad at writing secure software. Okay, and if I use a term like provably, you guys should ask me to prove it. Okay, and so what I'll show you is this. So I'm not sure how many of you remember these screens. Back in '99, there was the Melissa virus. And then in 2001, there was the Code Red and NIMDA virus worms. And every security guy in every consultancy used this diagram, which was stolen from Qaeda, because it had moving stuff and looked impressive. Security guys still do this. Like if you check out the Norse threat map, it's almost the same. Like you have a world map and you have stuff moving on it, so it seems like it must make sense.
That's not copyrighted, is it?
Yeah, sorry.
It's not copyrighted, so anybody can.
Yeah, just take it. What's interesting is in 2001, Mike Howard and David LeBlanc wrote Writing Secure Code. Okay, and in 2002, Bill Gates came out with his famous trustworthy computing memo. Okay, where he basically said to Microsoft, hey, listen, we need to get our shop in shape. He was a little more dramatic than that. He basically said, if we don't do this, it's the end of computing as we know it, because no one's going to trust computers anymore. But essentially, they made the call to turn Microsoft around. And I guess the question then is, have things changed? Okay, and to some effect they have. right, Microsoft really is the poster child for one of those people who managed to turn around a factory for insecure code into something a whole lot better. And you can see it in a bunch of ways. The example that I previously stated was, like in 2001, if you went to a Black Hat conference, Microsoft staff would literally hide their badges because they didn't want people to know that they were from Microsoft. And then a little later, Microsoft staff started giving talks at Black Hat, and a little after that, they started running their own Black Hat called Blue Hat. So when I gave this talk, the example that I gave here, which we can't go to right now because I can't alt-tab, was Microsoft's security bulletin for Feb 2015. Okay, and the security bulletin is particularly interesting because if you guys have seen a Microsoft bulletin, they list their software, they then list the type of bug that's in it, and then they have like an exploitability index, like how likely is this thing to be exploited. And in Feb 2015, which isn't a month that I chose because I was looking for a bad month, it was just the month that I originally gave this talk, they had 42 remotely exploitable bugs in Internet Explorer patched. Okay, so these are the guys who I'm saying are the poster child for writing secure software. And in their flagship product, the one that is most likely to expose people to risk, they had 42 remotely exploitable bugs in it. Okay, so yeah, we're not getting much better at that stuff. Okay, and for the long-haired hippies, the next thing you're going to say is, well, that's because it's closed source. Surely open source is going to be the thing that saves us. And you can kill that with one slide. Okay, and OpenSSL is interesting, so I'm going to come back to it in a little bit. Yeah, we'll come back to it. But yeah, there's OpenSSL, there's Heartbleed that everyone knew about. A little after that, there was Shell Shock, which should have been interesting. And I like Shell Shock because it brings back some of that composite security stuff. I have boxes that I maintain that are old OpenBSD boxes or old BSD boxes that for me have been hardened and kept safe for a while. And Shell Shock opened me to being vulnerable also because of proc mail filters that are sitting somewhere, and suddenly I was vulnerable to stuff effectively giving someone a bash shell. Okay, and the sad thing is even people with every incentive to do it right end up getting it wrong. So one of the other examples that I choose to pick on here was a phone project. I'm not sure if you guys have seen the Black Phone. Have any of you heard of it? Does anyone have it? Anyone? That's the appropriate response. So the interesting thing about the Black Phone is they certainly weren't shy with publicity. Okay, it's an NSA-free secret storing black box. They were 50 million funded. Okay, the world's most secure Android phone. I said before, that's not a very high bar. But essentially, these guys were building this thing to be the secure phone, right? And essentially, the phone met Mark Dowd. Okay, and if you guys haven't heard of Mark Dowd is a code auditing machine, okay? Like you give him code, he gives you bugs. But what's interesting is that Mark took a look at the Black Phone in his spare time. Okay, so he wasn't even contracted to them. He basically looked at it for fun. And he ended up finding a bug that was remotely triggerable. I'm not sure if it says it here. So you get remote arbitrary code execution. Blah, blah, blah. I'm just trying to see. Yeah. So what's interesting, it was in the messaging application. Okay, and what's interesting about this, and I take nothing away from Mark, right? He's clearly ridiculously good at finding bugs in software. But do this. If you were trying to think of a secure phone, how many attack vectors do I have for your phone? How many code parts do I have as a remote attacker to your phone? Okay, and this NSA-proof secure black box could be compromised by sending it a malformed SMS. Okay, so here's these guys with 50 million in funding who say they play against NSA-level attackers, and one of maybe 4 or 5 attack vectors to that phone they couldn't defend against. And if you were going to give an example of bad code, like I could literally stand up here and go on for a long time. But this, you guys would have seen some of the drama. This is against Sophos products. So at some point, Taviso from Google got a little angry with Sophos and started looking at their software. Like he's pretty brutal. Essentially, he goes through and says, listen, if you guys are running Sophos, it exposes your machine to risk. Okay, so running this thing that's supposed to be protecting your machine is going to open you up to more risk. And Sophos aren't the only guys. At some point, Matalas or Jackson Correct started looking at antiviruses. He said to the guys at Komodo, listen, it took me longer to install your software than it did to find the first bugs in your software. Okay, and he basically ripped them to shreds. And the guys over at Veracode essentially do a survey where they tried to categorize software by verticals. And security software came second only to CMS software in terms of how insecure it was. Okay, so it's CMS software and then security software, which again is a pretty dodgy place to be. But it's what prompted FX to say that basically by code quality, you're better off defending your network with Microsoft Word than with a checkpoint firewall. So he's pretty brutal. He actually adds that at least Word doesn't have a back channel to Israel. But in terms of security software, it's not always just the memory corruption bugs, right? Like sometimes it's more obvious. So I'm not sure how many of you use Enigmail or PGP on Thunderbird, but at some point, fairly recently, like in 2014, Enigmail would not encrypt mail that was sent via BCC. Okay, now I want you to think about how truly horrible that is. Like, Enigmail exists to encrypt your mail. And sometimes Enigmail would not encrypt your mail. Like in terms of what software is supposed to be doing, like that's a pretty bad fail. So our software is pretty bad. Okay, so the next thing I want to get to is markets. Okay, and what's interesting with markets is I think it gives us as security something finally which we can kind of count on, which is a really big contribution that we have is we've got a number of beautiful examples of market failure. Like the security industry is absolutely full of it. We've got tools that we don't need, which dominate the industry. We've got a skills gap that's massive, like everyone talks about it, but the market isn't automatically filling it. And we've got software that's used by everyone in the industry that can't manage to get paid. Okay, so also around the same time, you might have seen that Werner Koch, the guy who maintains GPG, was actually essentially maintaining it on $25K per year. Okay, so this is a software package that's used by everyone. Almost every open source vendor is using it for package signing. And this guy was essentially maintaining it himself and not getting paid for it. Just as an aside, like this was on Kickstarter for a little while. And if you don't recognize what this beautiful piece of engineering is, it's essentially a drink cooler. Okay, except it's a drink cooler that also mixes your drinks and also has a radio. And they managed to raise nearly 13.2 million for their cooler. Okay, so if that thing managed to get funded for 13.2 million, and we've got GNU PG, which can't make 25K per year, you've got a problem. The good thing is at some point after that article ran, a bunch of companies came through and then gave money to the GNU PG project. And what's interesting is once they got that money, you had a bunch of guys come out and say things like, well, the big question is now how are they going to spend this money? Okay, and personally, I feel like the guy's been doing all this for 25K per year. If he wants to take that money and completely blow it just partying for the rest of his days, I think we should let him. Out of interest, like some guy raised $55,000 on Kickstarter to make this potato salad. So clearly there is money out there waiting for people. But in truth, like the guys who raised the money for the potato salad knew what they were getting. Okay, and one of the big problems that we have is this problem of information asymmetry. Okay, and again, a little while back, I gave this talk on how pen testing companies are essentially a perfect market for lemons. And if you guys haven't heard the market for lemons thing, it's a 1970 paper by Akerlof, which talks about basically the failure in a market because of information asymmetry. Okay, so really simple, the way this works is you have a market where the cars in the market could either be lemons or they could be really good cars. And the problem is, sorry, I confused my clicking. The problem is a customer can't tell which is which. So as time goes on, the customer's only prepared to pay the price of a lemon because he doesn't know. So essentially what will happen is good cars get pushed out of the market, or the buyers or the sellers take them out of the market, and you hit a point where the only cars left in the market are then lemons. Okay, so essentially the bad products drive out the good products. And with pen testing, I was saying that that's exactly what's going to happen, because customers can't tell what's a good pen test from what's a bad pen test. Eventually, they're only going to be prepared to pay the price of a bad pen test. People who do good pen tests are going to leave the industry. But in truth, this applies to more than just pen testing. Oops. Okay, it applies to most security products. So Telegram's been in the news a lot lately. I'll use them as a quick example. At some point, Telegram went up, and essentially, you'll see on this one day, they had nearly 5 million people sign up for Telegram. Okay, and essentially, while you have them on the one hand, on the other hand, you have Moxie Marlinspike's Text Secure. Okay, now Moxie's got a big fan club. But what's interesting is he should, right? In terms of crypto, Moxie's done his product perfectly right. Okay, he's got the code all up. The code is all open source. People can look at it. He's published the way he's doing things. And Telegram, maybe they're okay, but they've done some things which are classically wrong. So instead of open sourcing their stuff, what Telegram have said is they'll run a contest, and whoever can defeat them in that contest effectively shows that their product isn't secure. And lots of people have spoken about why contests are the perfectly wrong way to test crypto products. Like again, Schneier's written a paper about it ages ago. But what's interesting to note is that the market couldn't differentiate. Okay, so if you look down here, you'll see that after a few years, Moxie's Text Secure product has something like 500K users, okay, as opposed to Telegram's 6 million downloads in a week. And this stuff happens to lots of things. Okay, you see it for secure browsers. So at some point, you'd also have seen the headlines, are you using the most secure and private web browser? Aviator, hands-on the most secure browser. Okay, and the Aviator browser was basically put out by the guys at White Hat Sec, okay, who basically took Chromium, which is the open source version of Chrome, and then did some stuff to it to make it the most secure web browser. Okay, and at some point, Taviso decided to take a look at it. Okay, and what happens when Taviso takes a look at stuff is fairly predictable. Okay, that's calc popping. But essentially, what was interesting is not just that he found a bug, because there's going to be bugs in software, but the bug that he found in it was truly horrendous. Like literally, the Aviator browser was taking user input and running it to a system call or running it to a backtick. So you didn't need shellcode. You basically had to tell the browser, run calc, and it ran calc for you. Okay, it was a pretty horrendous bug. Okay, and Justin Shu then came out and said, listen, if you're at all concerned about security and privacy, you shouldn't be using this browser. Okay, and it then became a whole Twitter/Google Plus fight. But what's interesting about that fight is in it, Justin Shu said something interesting. He said that the Google Chrome security team has 30 members of staff. Okay, he said Chrome privacy on its own has something like a dozen people working for it. Okay, and what's interesting for me there is, again, the fact that from the outside, you really can't tell the difference. Okay, with all of the hype that the Aviator browser was getting, certainly my mother wouldn't be able to distinguish between the two. But the difference security-wise was marked. Okay, and I try to pitch for GR security almost every time because, again, this is interesting to me. So GR security, the PAC security team and Spender have led almost every secure development improvement that makes it into mainline OSs. GR security has had, and it leads the market normally by about 10 to 15 years. GR security still kind of runs on user donations. And I say kind of because they still don't make enough money to do the stuff full time. As opposed to the number of companies that have popped up recently selling intelligence feeds. Okay, and you could take the money from one of those subscriptions for those intelligence feeds, and you could probably support Spender and the GR security team to be doing software innovation well into the future. And part of the reason the stuff goes so horribly wrong is because of broken incentives. Okay, and if we're going to talk about broken incentives, what you'll find is we've got horribly mixed incentives almost everywhere. You've got pen test companies these days who sell pen tests, even though by now most have figured out that pen tests aren't helping anything. We've got AV companies these days who make lots of money publishing reports on viruses that they didn't catch for the last 10 years. Okay, so I'm not sure if you noticed, like increasingly what AV companies do is publish on Stuxnet or publish on something. And one of the honest things is they've missed those things when it mattered. They now essentially incident response companies. Okay, and you find the mixed incentive stuff almost everywhere you look. Okay, essentially managers get promoted by shipping software, not by how secure the stuff is. And it's not just there, right? Like the stuff happens almost everywhere. With a quick show of hands, how many of you here run MacBooks or run OS 10? Out of interest, when did you guys start running OS 10? Do you remember? So mostly, for most people I know, it was around the time that Microsoft shipped Vista. Okay, and arguably, Vista was Microsoft's most secure operating system. Okay, by default, Vista certainly was. And if you compared the two, Microsoft Vista kicked OS 10 at the time all over the place. Okay, it had GS, it had ASLR, at a time when OS 10 completely didn't. Okay, and almost every security guy I know, at the point when Microsoft released their most secure operating system, swapped over to the less secure OS 10. Okay, and yeah, that's way for us to go incentivize stuff. And you see this happening a whole bunch of the time, okay? So all of you would have seen and sighed at Oracle's constant Unbreakable campaign. Okay, and if you check on Twitter, you'll see a whole bunch of people talking about how horrible Oracle is from really smart people. So guys like Ivan, they consistently win every race to the bottom. Okay, and all of this vitriol was aimed at IBM, at Oracle recently, or at the time, because of this. Okay, so David Litchfield broke them again and was talking at DEF CON about how Oracle get an F for security. And of course, the thing to look at there is at the same time, a business guy was making this tweet. One of the best comebacks in tech history. Okay, because if we're talking about how insecure Oracle is, what you should notice is it absolutely didn't show up in their stock. Okay, so the stuff was almost completely unrelated. And that stuff is not an outlier. Okay, so a few people since then have done a study on stock prices and security incidents. And what you'll find is there's almost no long-term correlation at all. So even guys who've had big breaches, you'll find their stock, it doesn't show up in their stock price at all. Okay, and what's interesting about this, this is a live doc, so I'll put the slides up later. You can go check them out. It still exists. And what's interesting is the security guys haven't figured this out yet. Like even the Washington Post figured out that profits rise, the breach didn't seem to affect the stock price. And you still get security guys going, you need to do security because your stock's going to suffer for it. Okay, and on this one, I think as security guys, we need to watch what we say because we cry wolf often enough and people are not going to listen.
Yeah, we say, here's the one or two companies that have failed and use those as examples, and then that distracts everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And we kind of, I understand why we got there. I understand why we used to say that. But look, the evidence just doesn't back that up anymore. And I'm not saying that security is not important. I'm just saying that's a bad argument to make. And you see enough examples of this, right? Like the snappening, if you guys remember the snappening when it happened. Okay, that's when Snapchat pictures leaked. You can look at their stock price at the time or even their sign up at the time, and it didn't affect them at all. In fact, we looked at this a few times. Like you can look at LinkedIn stock when LinkedIn had an incident and it did nothing. At some point, Dropbox had an error on their site where any username and password would let you log into Dropbox. And if you go and look at their signups over that period, their signups went up. Okay, nobody cared that Dropbox were giving your files to absolutely anyone. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about organizations. And with organizations, probably the first thing I want to talk about is the chief security officer role. And increasingly, I think this role is becoming too complex. It's becoming too hard for a single person to manage. And the example I want to give, just because I absolutely had to do this, was to take an example from War and Peace. And I did this mainly because I think it's cool to have something from War and Peace in a security talk. But essentially, what you're not going to be able to read here is the guy says that the activity of the commander-in-chief doesn't at all resemble what we imagine it to be when we quarterback the problem later on. Okay, he says we begin from some moment where we say this should have happened. And he says the commander-in-chief never sees that event as a single start and end. For him, it was always on a continuity. Okay, he always sees it as one of 100 problems that he had to do that day. And why I think this is interesting, because if you talk to security guys, every time there's a major breach somewhere, you'll find the security guys go, oh, that's so stupid. Why weren't they doing this? That's so silly. Why weren't they just doing this other thing? And again, all the time, those security guys are just ignoring the fact that we've got dozens of customers making exactly those mistakes. And again, all the time, we're just hoping that the stuff doesn't happen on our watch. And I think we've got a huge problem in terms of how we calculate risk. If you talk to the guys who do risk calculations, you'll find they'll give you perfectly good equations. Like they'll tell you about AIL and they'll tell you about average loss expectancy and that sort of stuff. And honestly, I don't know how they're doing this. I don't know the right way to do this either. Because the more you look at it, the more you'll find that there's parts of the business that understand what's valuable and understand what needs protecting. And then you've got technical guys who know how that stuff can be breached. But those two things aren't really meeting. I'll tell you the simple thing. I'm willing to bet that most companies at the board level have no idea how easily a bunch of people can read the board's emails. Like something simple like that, like reading the board's emails. There's a bunch of lowly paid employees at the company, like your help desk staff who can reset the password of the Exchange admin, who can then read emails. And the technical guys look at it and go like, yeah, of course that can happen. Or yeah, of course email is clear text and the first hop gets to see all that email. But the boards don't know this. And the boards think that the security stuff is being handled. And those two conversations are just not meeting. And part of this, I think, is socially, we haven't yet gotten used to this whole computer thing. Okay, and what I mean by that is, in the old days, if you ran a company, as people in the company found out where more skeletons for the company were buried, you paid them more. So essentially, their future gets tied to the future of the organization. Okay, and that was a kind of a natural protection mechanism. As people knew more dirt, you paid them more, and they were then vested in the company. But all of that changes when you've got lowly paid help desk staff with the same access, or you've got entry-level DBAs with access to all of the information and not the same kind of risk appetite. And I think socially we haven't adjusted to that stuff yet. So I'm going to ignore this just because that's stupid. Security guys are hilariously bad at thinking about the business risk. So my favorite security podcast is one called Risky Business. And it's really funny because at some point, way back when Square was starting up, Square featured on Risky Business. And someone said, well, what are we going to do? Oh, there's a company out there that's going to start processing credit cards on every iOS device. And the Risky Business host and his guest, who's a security expert, basically laughed, like, what a stupid idea. Like, how's that ever going to take off? Like, who's going to trust that? Okay, and yeah, I think Square's doing pretty okay, all things considering. For those of you who got into security because you read Clifford Stoll's The Cuckoo's Egg, what you should know is soon after he became famous, Clifford Stoll also had this talk where he basically spoke about the future of the web. Okay, and it's really funny where he says, like, people talk about people telecommuting, interactive libraries, digital networks, baloney. Do they lack all common sense? No online database will replace your daily newspaper. No CD-ROM can take the place of a competent teacher. Okay, he goes on to make like a whole bunch of predictions that are absolutely perfectly proven at this point. And you'll find that the stuff's fairly common, okay? Essentially saying this stuff's never going to happen on the internet because it's never going to take off. If we're looking at organizations, like a very real problem that you're going to have is this problem of mixed reporting lines. Okay, and essentially what I'm talking about here, there's some really good products out there. Okay, Bromium, Invincia, Cubes. But essentially these things have to be sold into an organization by the wrong people. And by this I mean you've got staff at the company which exists to do desktop support. And what these guys want to do is make sure that desktop support happens quickly, routinely, repeatably. And then you've got security guys who want to make sure that every time you spawn a browser, it's spawning in a micro hypervisor that can't then affect the rest of the operating system. Okay, those two things are separate competing goals. Okay, if you've worked at a big company that does tech support, like way back, I remember when I did Novell Netware Administration, we lived on the Netware TID site, okay, the technical information documents. Guys who do Microsoft support live on the Microsoft tech support pages. Now you want them to live on Bromium or Joanna Rutkowska's help pages on CubeSOS, right? That stuff's not going to happen. And probably one of the worst things for this is most security guys will tell you, you can't buy security, right? It's a process. Except this is pretty foreign to most companies and most boards. Because to them, you want something, you go out, you pay for it, and you get it. Okay, and again, it's why boards think that they're secure, because they're giving us the money and expecting stuff to get done. We're taking the money, we're just not telling them that we can't do it yet. Okay, so the last category I'm going to hit is people. Okay, and with people, we kind of know already that, that expertise is niche. Okay, and like this is a known problem. We have problems that need deep expertise, and we're not churning people out fast enough. But something that I think is interesting is that we're going to bump into a new problem, which is that people who know enough of an overview are becoming increasingly rare. Okay, so increasingly people who enter the field are being forced to specialize. Okay, that's normal. They've got to go deep on one track. But the number of people who can then listen to a number of experts and then make a reasonable decision for the organization is getting increasingly hard. And I think you can fix the specialization problem, but increasingly it's getting harder to fix the overview problem. And I think this stuff happens in a bunch of different ways. Like increasingly I speak to security teams who've never installed SendMail in their life. Like they've never installed their own MySQL database. And you're going to find this happening more and more as time goes on, just because of the nature of things. Okay? And one of the big problems when you're defending networks is that you're never really sure of what you really have. Okay, and what I mean here is, when you're an attacker, you've got a tight feedback loop. You try to break in, and you find out immediately whether you've broken in or not. When you're a defender, you often don't know for a really long time if you've just been wasting your time up until now. Okay, so the feedback loop for you is much, much longer. And humans just learn badly when you have long feedback loops. Okay, and I said I'd get back to OpenSSL. Yeah. So I want you to check this out carefully, right? So there was this whole, and this was genuine, like you put in OpenSSL and that's what you actually get. But I want you to check out these OpenSSL stories, right? So you'll find a whole bunch of experts came out with, please put it out of its misery, code is beyond repair, is it time to kill OpenSSL, insecure, and it's been insecure for years. But I want you to notice something. I want you to check the dates that all these experts spoke about how OpenSSL is bad. Okay, what you should notice is all of them are talking about it post-Heartbleed. Okay, and I can tell you, in all honesty, for years, if you asked us what you should do with crypto, our standard answer, without even thinking, would be use GPG for data at rest, use SSL for data in motion. Okay, it was a standard answer that all security folks would blurt out. People telling you that it sucks after Heartbleed aren't helping much as experts. So again, I want to go to the Justin Shu problem, okay? And we'll use Twitter as a really simple metric. You find Justin Shu. Do any of you recognize Justin Shu, by the way? Okay, so a few of you. If you're going to read a book on code auditing, you should be reading his book, which is The Art of Software Security Assessment. Okay, but what you should notice again is Justin with 3,000 followers. Okay, and then if you look at the guys behind the Aviator browser, okay, you have RSnake with 17,500 followers. You've got Jeremiah Grossman with nearly 60,000 followers. Okay, so again, it's really hard to figure out who the experts are and who you should be listening to. Jeremiah and RSnake are nice guys, and they've done nice research. But if you're going to find out about secure browsers, you should be listening to Justin Shu every day of the week and twice on Sunday. Okay, and part of the problem is we don't have enough people. Okay, the guys from Leviathan Security put out a really nice paper on the security skills shortage. And essentially what they said was, with the number of security holes we have, if every employee at GM, Costco, Home Depot, Delta, and Procter & Gamble became security experts tomorrow, we still wouldn't fill all of the security gaps that we currently have. Okay, and one of the other problems we have here was something raised by Dan Gear, which is security people don't get better like craftsmen. Okay, so you find a craftsman, if he's done 10 years, he does 15 years, his work is now better. You find a security guy who's done 15 years, it's not a guarantee that he's actually a good security guy. Okay, you'll find often it just means that they now past their prime and actually don't know the current technology that they should be working on. So Richard Danzig put out a really interesting paper called Surviving on a Diet of Poisoned Fruit. And it's worth reading the paper in general. He was talking about reducing the national risk when it comes to vulnerabilities. And he said something really interesting when he was putting together this paper. So he's an interesting guy. Like, he was previously used for stuff like they'd give him the task of figuring out how to do nuclear non-proliferation. Okay, and so he'd basically get 3 years, go talk to experts, come back with a policy. And he did the same stuff for software security. And so the interviewer asked him, what's the difference for you between software security and nuclear? And he said what was interesting for him was the way he would work is he'd speak to the experts, he'd go away, he'd write stuff. 3 months later, he'd come back and check with the experts if what he wrote was correct. Okay, and he said that system worked when he was working with nuclear. When he was working with security, he'd go away, write stuff, come back in 3 months, and the guys would tell him, no, that doesn't apply anymore. Okay, and he said it's not because the software guys were just changing their minds. He said genuinely, sometimes problems that didn't exist 3 months before now existed, and sometimes problems that people considered solved now came back to the fore. The example he was giving, which is an interesting one, is a distributed denial of service. When he first wrote the stuff, they considered it a solved problem. He went away, he wrote his stuff, he came back, and DDoS was a problem again. And one of the problems we have there is, when it comes to people, is we lose good people all the time. Okay, as an industry, we lose some of our best people, and we lose them in bunches of different ways. We lose them because they leave the industry. We lose them to offense, and we lose them to the scene. I'll go through some of these really quickly. So I'll go out and say it, although most people don't like to hear it. Doing offense is easier. Okay, if you're trying to do the split between defense or offense, most guys who are doing offense don't like it when you say this. But I can tell you, like, we did offense for a really long time, and it certainly is easier. And I don't just mean it because of the technical challenges. I mean it because there's a whole bunch of things that make defense harder. One of them is the fact that defenders need to give a whole bunch of bad news. Okay, if you're working for a boss, as an attacker, most often you're giving your boss good news. Yes, we broke in. If you're working as a defender, most of the time your feedback is when you get stuff wrong. As a defender, you have far fewer competing goals. And by this, what I mean simply is, if you're working in any of these outfits that do offense, either because you're an intelligence agency or you're one of the pen test teams, essentially people hire you, you spend your time thinking about breaking in, and you break in. When you're a defender working for an organization, you get pulled into a whole bunch of things that aren't exactly defense. Like your boss's daughter thinks she may have a virus on her computer, you're getting called to go help out. So we lose a whole bunch of people to our scene. Okay, and by this I mean we've got to take an honest look of who we've been solving for. Okay, and something we have to be honest about here is, if you look at this whole NSA intelligence community mess, we're responsible for lots of that stuff. And what I mean by that is, if you take a look at the conference talks that we've been doing, okay, you'll find that lots of the talks that we've been giving at Black Hat and DEF CON and all of the cool security conferences for a long time primarily haven't been helpful for the types of guys who are typically our customers. If anything, most of our talks have been useful to the IC. Okay, and you'll find something else that comes up, particularly in our industry, is we kind of have a variation of the old golden rule. Okay, so in the Wild West, the golden rule was whoever has the gold makes the rules. Okay, and you'll find now our variation of this is the 0-day rule. Okay, as long as your company can put out 0 days, it doesn't matter what you do, it doesn't matter how ridiculously evil the result of your research is, as long as you're putting out 0 days, people will clap for you, and it's all cool. And the scene doesn't necessarily work on stuff that matters, right? Because if you look at XSS, so I'm not sure how many of you remember, but around 2001, 2002, when XSS cross-site scripting made it on the scene, the almost universal response to it was lame. Okay, it was the lamest thing ever. If you run a web app today of any significant size, XSS is probably your biggest challenge. When Stuxnet was first released, a whole bunch of the security guys came out talking about how lame it was. They didn't encrypt their payload. Look at how easy it was to detect. Go and read the book on Stuxnet. Like, other than the fact that obviously it achieved what it wanted to achieve, which was pretty notable, the first response from the security community is not something you should be going on. For that matter, client-side exploits. For so long, were considered lame in the security community. They were considered so lame that the early pwn-to-own contests wouldn't even give you a first prize if your thing was a client-side exploit. Okay, today, client-side exploits are absolutely the thing that you have to be worried about. Now, they weren't suddenly the thing you had to worry about. They were always the problem. It's just that as a security community, we decided that they weren't important. I'm going to skip oh my god China because we already laughed at the oh my god China stuff. So in summary, really quickly, we've got fundamental computer science problems. We've got pathological market failure. We've got deep-rooted sociology problems, which should make you think then that I'm agreeing with Dan Geer, who says that information security is possibly the most intellectually challenging profession on the planet, but I'm not. Because I actually want to add to that to say you're probably conning yourself if you think that this applies to what you're doing. Okay, and this kind of late into it, considering you guys are all sitting here wondering when he stops, when he gets off, it goes to probably the central thesis of my talk, which says InfoSec can be really hard and InfoSec can be really important, but most of us are not working on the problems that are hard or working on the problems that are particularly important. Okay, for the most part, we're choosing to work on problems, we're choosing to focus on the problems that aren't necessarily the problems we should be. If you look at our conference talks, most of the time we get quick dopamine hits. Okay, we work on stuff that's cool for us. We give the talk, it makes us happy. People clap for us. We do pen tests and feel a little bit better, like we're doing something. But fundamentally, we're not moving the needle forward on any of these fundamental problems. I keep picking on pen tests. I'll tell you why really quickly. How many of you here have done a pen test in the last while? Do we have penetration testers? Okay. The question that I ask normally is, if we take the typical company, how many zero-day would be required to access your company's crown jewels? Okay, so one answer here is 0. You'll find most people will come back and tell you at most 1. And I'm saying if we've been doing this stuff for 20 or 25 years and people are still just 1 0-day away from the worst day of their lives, like we're doing something really wrong. If the best products that we can put out, like if we literally went from antivirus to now antivirus at the gateway level, and that's our big product offering, then clearly we're doing something wrong. And as security guys, you'll find that we need to get over our sense of entitlement. If you talk to any security guy working at a corporation, one of the first things he'll tell you is security needs to be included in more stuff. They don't include us in their decisions. Okay, and nobody else says this. Like, why should you be included in stuff? Like, if you're a marketing department and if you suck at marketing, then you'll find that companies root around you. They'll go and get external marketing. If you're a security guy and if you only add obstacles to people's conversations, why would they include you? Okay, you can go the route of being compliance, but most security guys don't want to be compliance because it's just not cool. And we need to refocus where we're doing our research. Okay, how many of you here use a password manager? Okay, most of you, which is cool. How many of you here have recommended that companies use password managers? Okay, like push through the recommendation. Okay, you'll see a couple. It's super interesting if you look at, so you absolutely should be using a password manager. Like I go to companies that are doing security that haven't forced their execs to use password managers, and I can't imagine what they're thinking. Okay, so password managers have done more for security than most of us have done for a long time. And what you'll notice is, like one of the better password managers, 1Password, is made by agile bits. Okay, not guys who are in the security community, not guys who are in the scene. They write Mac apps, and they decided to write this Mac app, which is a password manager. And at the same time, what you'll find is us security guys focusing on stuff like this. Okay, so this was a really good paper by K2 on how you can find rootkits. Okay, and essentially he goes into using process page table detection. Okay, and essentially he gives you a technique to find a rootkit on one machine that's sitting somewhere in your lab. And essentially what I'm saying here is that there's a beautiful gap in the market. Okay, this is a ray of hope. There's a gap in the market because we've essentially got this difference between the customers we wish we had. Okay, so if you speak to security researchers, we all would like to work on this customer who actually has a box with one rootkit that's possibly doing decom, and we want to find a clever way to detect that the process table's been hooked. But actually what most people need is a good password manager. Okay, there's really simple products that are needed that people are waiting for, and instead the stuff we want to focus on is stuff that only 1 or 2 people in the world actually need. Okay, we need to build the tools that actually solve these user problems. And the good thing about it is that it gives us an opportunity to be relevant again. Okay, because largely security people, security researchers have a problem of increasing irrelevance. Okay, the stuff that we're working on just doesn't apply to most of the people who actually need security anymore. So Dino Daizovi, always quotable, has a really nice quote. You never change things by fighting the reality. Build a new model that makes the existing ones obsolete. It's something that security people need to start figuring out. And again, I want to make it clear that I'm not slating offense. But one of the things that I am saying is back in '99, it was cool to be on the offense side, okay? Because that's where we thought the hard problems were. But today, what you should have figured out is offense isn't that cool anymore. It's not that hard anymore. Like if you want to be doing offense that's cool, you need to be playing at a completely different level. You almost want to be at the NSA level where you're a global passive adversary, and then you can start to do cool things again. But other than that, for the most part, it's clubbing baby seals. And like right now, our future is being decided for a whole bunch of things. You've got people talking about legislation. The guys in the legislation debates are mainly guys who sell zero-day because they're worried about their businesses, or guys who think that the word zero-day is evil and should be stricken from the books. So we've got interesting problems that are happening. We're at an important inflection point. We face a crisis of relevance and a crisis of confidence. There's important problems that need solving, but for the most part, we're not solving them. Our best and brightest, for the most part, are spending their time on sideshows that distract and entertain the rest of the masses. And so for the most part, the talk is a call for you guys to say that what we need is for you to show up and choose a side. More than anything, for you to start throwing your hat in the ring, start doing stuff that kind of contributes. Yeah, which is about the end of it. Yeah, except if you guys have any questions. Anyone?
Yeah, to your last point, do you have any suggestions?
So suggestions specifically on how you should show up?
No, more like what problem, like just out of curiosity, you remember, we had that talk when I was talking earlier,
Yeah.
what I do for a living.
So I
I'm
think
kinda new
there's,
to this.
yeah, I think there's a ton of security problems that are out there that need solving. If you go through the slides alone, there's a bunch of stuff that we haven't figured out. I think Duo, not just because I'm here, is a good example of it. It's taking a security problem and saying, let's solve this. One of the things, so I didn't reference when you speak about the Moxie slides, one of the things that Moxie and them are doing that's really cool is starting to push for the fact that you need to build a product that's good and secure. Like people don't choose your software because it's secure. Like that's not enough. So in part, we need to start building software that wins because it's good and also happens to be secure to boot. So yeah, I think there's a ton of them. If you mail me off list, I can give you a whole bunch of ideas. Anyone else?
Somebody on the YouTube has a question.
Yes.
Because they say, what do you think about 2FA? I swear to God, it was not someone from your company.
Yes. I think some company should come up to solve this problem. I think that would be a good idea. I think it's interesting because again, it's a simple problem theoretically that people should have got to a whole long time ago, and people haven't. Like, it's almost stupid when you see the number of compromises that then don't have 2FA. So yeah, for sure, Mr. YouTube guy, YouTube 192, you should do it.
I think when Haroon said everyone should use password managers, what he meant is Duo two-factor authentication.
Yes. Thanks, John, for translation from my South African.
So you didn't say much about what security companies should do from a software perspective. I didn't hear too much about that. I don't know if it's
Right.
it's the people who are currently in security to be joining those companies, or what
Right.
your thoughts are.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So there's a bunch of good documentation now on doing secure software engineering. There's a bunch of companies, so although I was a little skeptical at first, Gary McGraw's BSIM looks like it's worth taking a look at. And essentially what he's doing is collecting a whole bunch of data from companies on what they do to get secure development happening. I think at this point, we're starting to inch closer and closer to software liability. Most people think that it's going to happen. So if you're a company that's putting out a bunch of code, I think even if you didn't care about security, just the smart move would be to start preparing for putting out secure software, because I think software liability is coming.
What about bug bounties?
It's a good question. There's a bunch. So far, everyone I know who works with bug bounties will tell you why it's a great idea. From what I've heard, the few problems that you need to consider with bug bounties is the fact that initially there's sometimes a whole bunch of stuff reported. You need to make sure you can deal with it. But it sounds like a good idea. Like if you have a company, if you go to one of the better companies, they'll walk you through the process so that you don't suddenly get 300 vulnerabilities on day one. But it sounds like a good idea. Sounds like you should be considering it.
So with this being a huge university town and talking about incentives, there's a lot of incentives around CS majors or trying to incentivize sort of secure development in the curriculums. And how do you see that playing out when you talk about incentives at the software development?
Yeah, it's a good question. The question on writing secure software, I think, goes a long way. Like when you talk of incentives there, I can tell you, so we've got a company that writes code, and we want to do things securely, and we have deadlines. And so the problem is, like, there's multiple parts to it. The one is we've got to start teaching students at university to write secure code. We've then going to get the incentives right for the organizations so that they go through the pain of doing this. So when I did this talk initially, I did it at Troopers, and the other keynote was Dr. Sergey Bratis, who spoke about LangSec. And I'm not sure how many of you have looked into LangSec. It's called Language Theoretic Security, where they basically are putting out a way to develop stuff securely. And I can tell you that I'm pro LangSec. I think it's a great idea. And at my company, we're not yet using it, because when it comes down to it, we all have deadlines to push. So I don't know, so I'm not really answering your question. I think it should be taught at university. We should be teaching them. In truth, one of the better ideas that I've seen for companies getting this right is to start building secure libraries. So you start building pockets of trusted, audited, secure code. Because I think in the same way that you've got to build software that's good and then secure, or that wins because it's good, not just because it's secure, I think if you have an organization that's building software, you need to make it easy for people to do the right thing. Like, educating them has to happen, but I think you need to start doing more than just that.
Right, like using OpenSSL is maybe not the absolute worst thing.
Yeah, so OpenSSL is a bad example. Like right now, there's good alternatives, or guys are working on stuff like LibreSSL and stuff like that. There, for the most part, I think people just need to make those decisions consciously. Like the danger is embedding OpenSSL; it never gets patched, or you're linking to an old version of it. But essentially, my answer there would be yes, you need to educate your developers, you need ongoing training, you need secure libraries, so that your guys, like, you can't tell everyone how to do auth securely, but you can tell them that all auth gets done with libauth1, and then you can focus on making libauth 1 secure. So I think it's a reasonable way to go. But there's a lot of good documentation, lots of good processes on software development life cycles. I'd go for that. Anyone else wants to catch the ball?
All right, we've got one from Mark Stanislav, former Duo guy.
Right.
Now at Rapid7. He says, if financial impact and public perception aren't honest drivers for security improvement within organizations based on the data, what are the drivers you feel should be getting conveyed to organizations?
Right. It's a good question. So I think it depends. Like, I think one of the big problems, and it's something that I mentioned in one of those papers that I quoted, I think one of the mistakes we've been making fairly consistently is trying to make these messages generic. So we try to have a message that says, you're going to suffer a breach and it's going to cost you terribly. And the problem is we try to apply that to absolutely everyone, and the honest answer is it doesn't. So for those organizations that we listed, the breach meant nothing on their stock price. I think for the most part, it depends on which company you're talking about. So if you take the video that preceded mine, software security ended up being a risk to life. Like, it's not about this, or at that point, it wasn't about their stock price. It was about, you do this wrong, you're going to kill people. And I think for different organizations, that stuff needs to be phrased differently. I think there's a bigger thing there, which is we've been trying to pitch software security as something that could be done generically. I think the AV companies made this mistake. Most of us made this mistake, where we tried to say, you all need to do this, and this generic solution works. And I almost think that security we haven't been doing it long enough yet to have generic solutions yet. Like, I think right now, most of the solutions are custom for the organization. And I think the drivers would be custom for organizations also.
Just to follow up with that, do you see a change coming now that there's sort of more of a market push towards corporate social responsibility? Or has that not been seen in the security industry yet?
So has CSR impacted security?
Or has it impacted the strategies that you guys use to communicate security problems?
Yeah, in honesty, I haven't seen it. Like I've seen people talking for a while, like Dan Gear's spoken for a while about the fact that if you're not secure, it's effectively the same as having a swimming pool without putting a fence over it, so you become a public nuisance. But no, I haven't seen CSR used to try to push security at all. It's interesting. Anyone else? Anyone else on YouTube who thinks 2FA is a good idea? I'm just kidding.
So you mentioned how the stock price doesn't fall after a breach, and you mentioned how you suggested OpenSSL, but then we had Heartbleed. But then in the wake of Heartbleed, we saw there was patching, and we just talked about how your generic answer of security is important, it'll cost you, isn't true. Is security actually important, or are we wrong? Because pretty much everything you presented so far implies that I shouldn't care about security at all.
Yeah.
Because everything will still be fine in the end.
Yeah. So
maybe everything is on fire, but you're just the dog that's
no,
fine.
it's actually pretty cool that you raised it, because for one thing, it says that my whole talk was completely useless. But on a serious note, I think so the thing that I want to make sure of is not that all of security is useless. It's just that we can't be selling it generically to a whole bunch of people. Again, if you take the Charlie example, like, insecure software there would cost people their lives. And I think there's a bunch of cases. I was talking to someone upstairs about this, where I think we've been pitching security wrong, and we've been doing it because we've been making lazy arguments. So we've been making the lazy argument that said, if you do this, it's going to affect your stock price. In South Africa, for a long time in the early 2000s, we used to try to defend the banks. So before they put out a new internet banking version, we'd do app testing on it. And one of the interesting things we found is, at some point, there was a big bug in one of the big banks' internet banking. It made the headlines in the Sunday papers. And we then went back to the bank and tracked signups for internet banking, and it went up after that internet banking headline. And they'll tell you it's because any news or any headline is fine. Now, that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be testing internet banking. because if we get into internet banking, we're going to transfer money, and it's going to be real loss. It just means that we'd be stupid to be telling them that they should worry about it because of consumer confidence. So to that, I'm saying, no, we just need to make sure we're aiming at it for the right reasons. And for some of it, I think we need to be grown up and say not everyone needs the same level of security. It's why that piece of mine was titled, your security might be terrible, but it might be okay. Because I think there are some places that don't need certain levels of security. And because we've been trying to generically sell the same thing to everyone, we've been trying to convince everyone that it was the same, and it's just not. Let's see you make that throw. Huh, nice.
More about the catch.
Nice.
All right. Previously, you had mentioned that CISOs and the board and the technology at the lower levels and the misunderstanding between the two. If CISOs aren't the answer, how do you get the board online with the technical?
Yeah. My honest answer there is I don't know the solution to that problem. And to be clear, I'm not saying CISOs are the problem that way. I'm saying the CISO job is increasingly getting ridiculously complex. And the question of how we get this risk explained between the two, like I honestly don't know the answer. And in truth, I don't see many people asking that question. So I've seen companies which now have hundreds of people working in their security team. And if you go and ask them what they're doing, they'll show you their plans for patching servers and their plans for patching laptops and their plans for monitoring AV and monitoring IDS. And if you asked me what I would do to sync that company, it doesn't involve anything to do with their AV or their file servers. Like syncing that company is about getting their CFO's email or their CFO's time on Excel so that I can see what the company is buying next year so that I can predict what the company is doing. And effectively, that means I need one browser exploit for their CFO and their hundreds of millions on their hundreds of staff and all of their server patching is almost just busy work. Like that stuff doesn't impact the thing that matters most for that organization. And so increasingly I'm saying that if security wants to be relevant, we need to take that step back and look at that again. And again, that example is an interesting one for me because if not for us, nobody knows that. Like nobody can be expected to know that the CFO reading his financial statements from the same machine that he browses Reddit with is a problem. We are the only guys who know how bad that is. But we're busy patching servers, monitoring AV, and monitoring whatever else it is. And like you'll find, like I've spoken to security guys where I ask them this question, like they have a famous CEO. And I say, like, how many steps would it take for me to own your CEO's machine? And most of them will tell you, you just need one browser. One of the things, so we've got a security product that effectively, along the way, tests users' browsers. And we almost never see web browsers today without an out-of-patch Shockwave and out-of-patch Java, which means we don't even need 0-day for their CEO. We just need him to click on one of our links, and we'll own him with a 2-year-old Java exploit. And again, what I'm saying is if that's a company that's spending on a CISO, spending on a staff of 200, spending on all of this equipment, but the fundamental question that says, who's your most important guy, CEO or CFO? How many attacks would it take to get him 2-year-old Java exploit? Like, what the hell are we doing? Nice. You guys got skill with that thing.
That's very interesting. So, like, one potential solution in this case is to try to educate the C-level guys, you know, about, okay, maybe if you're editing spreadsheets or anything that's company critical, you do it on a separate computer. And if they argue, well, we can't afford to do that because it's going to cost, but you bring up, well, geez, we got all this money we're spending for all these other people. You think we could probably budget a little bit to have a separate laptop for him to do that without a browser, without, you know, without any of this other stuff loaded on it, just the, you know, bare, you know, office or whatever he needs to do that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so it's a good point. And my point is you can totally come up with a squillion good solutions to this, and some of them will be like as simple as give the CFO an iPad, and so he surfs from the iPad and does his work. And all of those are good solutions if we are asking those questions. But instead, in most companies, we're not. Because what we've gotten to now is this point where we spend our time on this hamster wheel, patch the servers, check the antivirus, check the IDS, check the FireEye logs. And so you've got all this busy work that's happening where, like for any of these problems, someone has a perfectly good solution if we just knew that that was the question that we needed to stop and ask.
So a quick follow-up on that. So basically, this kind of reminds me of something a friend told me once when we had a discussion about computer and network security. And he kind of said something that made me think about when you're going to do that kind of stuff, you got to think about what are you trying to secure? What problem you're trying, so it's basically what problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah.
You got to kind of like look at that.
It's exactly right. And I'm saying that there's not enough of that questioning going around. And in part, we've stopped that because we've gotten distracted. And I think we need to get back to that fundamentally.
So in a roundabout way, that first question I asked, I think you may have come up with one particular...
Yeah, I think it's a problem that needs solving.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add, it's also cyclical, right? So we come up, two decades ago, the network-based attacks are going to be the primary way in because they're more surreptitious. And so we focus on that and we come up with solutions for that, and then we sort of educate people, and the mindset is this is the attack that we have to protect against. But once we have that barrier done, the hackers are going to follow the flow of least resistance. They're lazy, right? So, if some other more easily obtained exploit comes along, or exploit vector, they're going to go for that. And if we don't continually ask the question over and over again, we're going to fall behind.
Yeah, so I think you're right. I think one of the things that I go back to is, again, the last talk that I gave was a little more upbeat than this. But before that, I spoke to a whole bunch of my friends in the industry, and a lot of them, when I told them stuff that I was going to say, a whole bunch of them told me, you don't understand, you're not taking into account these reasons why we've been failing. Like, attackers do this, attackers do that. And essentially, what I'm saying with this talks is not how hard we're trying, because I think some people have been trying hard. I'm basing it just on results. And if you take your average company today, and if the most precious guy in your company is still takeable with a 2-year-old Java bug, then it doesn't matter what you've been doing. We've been getting it wrong. And I think that's the case for most companies that you look at. Literally hundreds of millions spent, and 1 0 day, 1 2-year-old day, and you'll take that company out forever. For the last talk that I gave, I asked the question a little while back on Twitter, which said, how many of you know of a company that if I broke into it, I wouldn't be able to run around like it was 2003? And most people, most of my friends, most of the guys who've been doing this for a long time, at best said, we know 1 or 2. And that's a ridiculously small number considering the amount that's being spent and how long we've been doing this. Alex Stamos gave a talk at AppSec USA where he basically took the Fortune 500 and said, you've got the top 100 who maybe can have a shot at playing this game, and then he called the rest the toasted 400, saying these guys are so bad, they don't even know, they're not playing the game. And the thing that I think is interesting there, again, as a guy who's been doing this for a while, is I'm willing to bet those companies don't know that they're the toasted 400. I'm willing to bet those guys are paying security staff and are buying security equipment, and they don't know that we think they're the toasted 400. And we're saying they can't even play the game, they're broken. And initially when I wrote some of those blog posts, I was writing it because I was saying, this can't, we're going to get caught. At some point, someone's going to figure out that they were listening to us and we were full of it. And part of the reason I write the blog post is an early form of, hey, not me. Those guys, they're the ones to blame.
So one last question before we wrap up.
Yes.
Ignoring all of this function of the security industry, do you think things are going to be better in security? Say, 5 years out from today, you come back on site, what story do you tell us? Are we in a better place?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think some stuff's getting better. Like, despite what I said about Microsoft, they've clearly made strides. So I think software security in some places has a way to go. In terms of most corporations, like maybe the move to the cloud starts saving some of them. Maybe Beyond Corp and ideas like that start saving. Number two, maybe stuff like Beyond Corp starts saving some of them. So I think that stuff could get better. But I think for a while, things are going to get worse. And one of the reasons why I think they're going to get worse, well, there's a bunch of reasons. I think complexity is one. I think there's an increased awareness of what hacking can get you. So like with WikiLeaks, Assange is famous for saying courage is contagious. As some people leak, more people get the guts to leak. I don't know about that, but what I do know is that WikiLeaks have made people aware of the fact that that data has value. And so I think in most corporations now, there's an increased awareness of what stealing the CEO's email can do. With the Snowden NSA revelations, there's a whole bunch of people who now think about hacking as achieving ends. So I think in the next while, we're going to see not old school defacement hacks. I think you're going to start seeing utility hacks, which is let's break into company X, get their stock information, and use it. Because I think like bad actors now have an increased awareness of hackery. And maybe that pushes us over the edge and brings in new solutions, new people. So I don't know. I think it's going to get worse for a bit.
All right, everybody give Haroon a round of applause. Thanks so much for coming.